Tonight I'll read Chapter 16, Pinwheels. Emily frantically twisted under the warden's painful grip, trying to break free. Her flailing arm caught the tray that he held and knocked it flying against his chest, the paper cups of tea bursting in an explosion of hot liquid all over him. Taverner bellowed in anger and pain and loosened his grip. With a desperate effort, Emily writhed free and ran past him up the stoneway, dodging through the crowd frantically, expecting to feel a heavy hand on her shoulder at any moment. A restaurant awning ahead offered the hope of shade and concealment, and she darted under it and looked back for signs of pursuit, breathing heavily. The crowds milled past as if nothing had happened. Taverner hadn't followed her. She peered down the stoneway and caught glimpses of him in the distance running in the opposite direction, down towards the patrol boat, his radio in hand. A helpful restaurant worker was leaning over the railing with a hose, directing a jet of high-pressure water down onto the patrol boat's slimy deck. Wriggling eels were being blasted off into the canal below. The three wardens who had been on the patrol boat were standing arguing on the stoneway while he cleaned up. Taverner joined them and started to gesticulate furiously, pointing up the stoneway in Emily's direction. That didn't look good. Impatiently, Taverner boarded the patrol boat before the restaurant worker had finished and made his way towards the wheelhouse. Unfortunately, as he changed course to avoid the jet of water, he slipped on a patch of slime and ended up waving his arms wildly and skidded directly into it, receiving the full force of the water on his chest. The watching crowd cheered and applauded in appreciation. Emily winced. Taverner shook his fist and swore at the restaurant worker, who shrugged and switched his hose off. Two of the remaining wardens cast off the mooring ropes, boarded the patrol boat, and cautiously took their positions on the deck as Taverner started the boat's engine with a roar and a puff of blue smoke. The remaining warden started to make his way up the stoneway in Emily's direction. Taverner reversed the patrol boat roughly out into the channel, bumping against the floating restaurant heedlessly. Once out on open water, he handed the wheel over to one of the other wardens and grabbed a pair of binoculars. Emily shrank into the darkest corner of the awning as the lenses pointed directly at her, and the patrol boat surged up the canal in her direction. This had all gone wrong. Escaping from sleepy wardens under the cover of darkness was one thing. Fleeing from a boat full of furious, wet, slime-covered wardens in broad daylight was something else entirely. What would her dad say when she was caught? Her mouth went dry. If she was locked up in a cell on her own, she had no doubts that with the wardens acting as they were, it would be very easy for Mrs. Harrow to arrange some kind of unfortunate, life-ending accident to befall her. Starting to panic, and with her heart pounding, she left the concealment of the awning and, keeping her head down, started to walk quickly up the stoneway, looking for a way through the whitewashed houses away from the canal. The roar of the patrol coming up the canal behind and to the right of her was becoming louder. Suddenly there were shouts ahead of her, and she looked up, and her heart sank as she saw another patrol boat, presumably the one she and Sam had hidden from earlier, had come up the channel from the opposite direction and was bumping up to the bank just a stone's throw ahead of her. A couple of wardens jumped off onto the stoneway and started to run towards her. Emily started to back away, then remembered and looked behind her and saw the warden who had stayed on the stoneway rapidly approaching, his face thunderous. Taverner was bringing the patrol boat in towards the bank. She was surrounded and in moments would be captured. She took a deep breath and raised her chin defiantly. "Emily!" screamed a familiar voice from the water. "Stop daydreaming!" It was Sam, on the back of a pinwheel, weaving in towards her through the water traffic. Ahead of him, just skimming up the bank on her pinwheel, was Susie Longlost. She'd pulled her headscarf off, and her red hair blazed in the sunlight like a beacon. Her expression was furious, but her eyes shone with excitement. "Jump!" she commanded, as the wardens on the stoneway closed in on Emily. Emily didn't have time for subtlety and simply ran to the edge and leapt desperately into the air towards the pinwheel, the nearest warden's hand just brushing her jacket. She landed heavily on the footboard, clutching hold of Longlost for support, the force of her landing dipping the pinwheel down into the water, so the water swirled up to their ankles. But then Longlost twisted the throttle, and with a watery roar, the pinwheel bounced up again out of the water like a cork, and they surged forward past the prow of the oncoming patrol boat. Emily glanced up and saw Taverner glaring down at her. Exhilarated by her rescue, she couldn't resist winking at him. "Hold on tight and do what I do," yelled Longlost over the high-pitched whine of the motor and the whirring splash of the pinwheel beneath their feet. Emily clutched Longlost's waist tighter as they leant into a turn to avoid a passing water taxi. Emily glanced back and saw Sam behind her on Aaron's pinwheel. Two more of Longlost's crew, a skinny boy and a fair-haired girl, were waiting for them on pinwheels in the main channel. "Split up!" Longlost shouted to them as they whirred up. "Make your own way back, and don't get caught!" They nodded and weaved rapidly away in opposite directions. A siren started to wail behind them, and Emily glanced back to see Taverner's patrol boat surging up the channel not far behind. The second patrol boat was turning and would soon pick up the pursuit as well. Emily looked ahead and was horrified to see a cargo barge blocking the channel ahead of them as it manoeuvred into a mooring bay between a floating emporium and a laundry boat. In moments the patrol boats would catch up with them and they would be trapped. There was a rapidly narrowing gap on the left between the prow of the barge and the stern of the emporium. Emily gasped as Longlost directed the pinwheel straight towards it and picked up speed. Sam's pinwheel shot past them and took the gap first, with an arm's length of clearance on either side. By the time Longlost and Emily reached the gap, the clearance left and right was hardly more than a hand's breadth. The closeness of the wooden hulls as they shot through took Emily's breath away. "Hard right!" screamed Longlost as they powered into the mooring bay, the brightly painted hull of the emporium on one side and the rusting iron of the laundry boat on the other, seemingly as high and solid as cliffs. Emily threw her weight to the right as Longlost twisted the steering column hard, and the pinwheel seemed to shudder as it changed direction and flung up a huge wash of spray against the rusting hull of the laundry boat in front of them. Then it righted itself, and, having almost totally reversed direction in a matter of seconds, they shot back out through the gap on the other side of the barge. This time, Emily felt the rough wood of the oncoming barge brush her shoulder as they went through. "Lead in!" shouted Longlost as she took the pinwheel in a tight arc around the far side of the barge, heading for the stern. Emily held on for dear life, her heart pounding. Ahead of them, the pinwheel carrying Sam completed the turn and passed out of sight beyond the barge's stern. As they followed in its wake and rounded the stern, passing between it and another barge moored in the middle of the channel, they almost collided with the first of the two patrol boats on the other side, as the wardens waited impatiently to come through. As soon as they saw the pinwheels pass between them, having cut back on themselves, there was frantic shouting, and the patrol boats began to turn to follow. Emily saw that Taverner was shouting furiously into his radio. "Thanks for coming back," she shouted to Longlost. "What in hell's name have you done to upset the wardens so much?" Longlost shouted back, weaving the pinwheel expertly through the oncoming traffic. "They've gone crazy." "It's difficult to explain," yelled Emily. "Try me. Your boyfriend's already try to convince me that the whole town's under attack from mythological creatures." "He's right," Emily shouted back. "You're crazy, both of you." "It's the monks," shouted Emily. She didn't hold out any hope of Longlost believing her, but just saying the words helped untangle the confusion in her head. "They're summoning the Wyrms. They want to scare everyone into joining their religion." Longlost shook her head. "So why are the wardens crazy?" "The Wyrms cast a shadow over people," yelled Emily. "It fills them with fear and makes them behave weird." Longlost shook her head again. "But your friend Sam said this worm thing was killed." Emily gasped as they brushed past an oncoming water taxi. Its passengers stared at them with open mouths as they shot past. "There must be another worm," she shouted. "One that's doing this to the wardens." She threw caution to the winds. "Me and Sam are trying to stop the monks and stop all this happening," she screamed, "but we need your help to get into the abbey." She felt Longlost's waist tense suddenly beneath her hands, and the red-haired girl swore violently. "Pike boats!" Longlost shouted. "Now we're really in trouble." And that was the end of chapter 16. Good night.